Good morning and welcome to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today, we're going to be speaking with the Horticultural Society of Stouffville and about the Horticultural Society. There is a movement right now to tear down one of the most precious gardens in Stouffville and to replace it with a tank and a cenotaph memorial. Unfortunately, the cenotaph may come at the expense of one of our most beautiful gardens. And we are going to speak about that today. But first, let's just start by talking about what the Horticultural Society is. For almost a century, the Stouffville Horticultural Society has been a mainstay in social calendars for the residents of Stouffville and the surrounding area. The society was organized in 1924 under the authority of the Provincial Ministry of Agriculture, with the focus on both horticulture and gardening. The early year membership included many local farmers as well as gardeners. Gradually, interest shifted to gardening. In the 1960s and 70s, women entered the full-time workforce in greater numbers, often in jobs far from Stouffville, leaving little time to spend in the upkeeping of large gardens. The focus of the society again changed to reflect that reality. At the present time, their mission is to educate members and members of the public, adults and children, on the benefits of maintaining native habitats by planting native trees, shrubs, perennial grasses, and flowers, while avoiding the need to plant invasive species, with a view not only to attracting and providing sustenance to our native and beneficial insects, but also to create sustainable and time-saving gardens that beautify our community. They meet each month, March to November, except for August, on the third Monday of each month, and they invite expert speakers in to talk about things that are of interest to their members. They have various how-to workshops, flower shows, and design competitions, a photography competition, a yearly plant sale, bus trips to visit gardens around southern Ontario, and they hold their occasional Happy Place event to honor gardeners who have created outstanding gardens, large or small. They're always looking for people to come and join, so feel free to join the Horticultural Society and Gardeners of Stouffville. Now, we're going to talk this morning about a specific garden, and this is the anniversary garden that was established in 2017 by the Stouffville Horticultural Society in collaboration with the town of Stouffville. And they created a garden at the corner of Park Drive South and Booth Drive across from Memorial Park to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday, focusing entirely on native perennials and shrubs that will support native birds and insects, including bees and pollinators. The garden has grown substantially from its first year, and this past year it finally came into its own with a lush and colorful display throughout the spring, summer, and fall, a continuing and evolving project, and with the help of willing volunteers, we hope to see it remain a beautiful town attraction for many years to come. Currently, there is a move by the town of Stouffville to relocate the cenotaph. And they're going to relocate the cenotaph from the current location at the Legion on Mostar to this particular spot where this beautiful garden lives in Memorial Park. Now, the downside of this is that, in my opinion, they are going to tear out the garden or try to relocate the garden. And in its place, they are going to put the cenotaph and a tank. The proposal is for a leopard tank. I don't know about you, but I would much prefer to see a garden commemorating our soldiers and the people who have fought for this country over the years than a tank. This morning we're going to talk to Joan Bostock, and she's from the Horticultural Society of Stouffville, and she's going to talk to us about the garden, how it came to be, and how they have initiated a fight to save the garden. Good morning, Joan.
Good morning, Brenda. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Well, we love to have you, and we love to talk about flowers. In the past, we've had Mert on, and we've talked about flowers and planting. Every year we talk with the Invasive Species Department of York Region to kind of try and coach people what to plant and what not to plant in their gardens. So in our own kind of backdoor way, Fresh Waves is always having horticultural aspects on the show, because I think it's really important for people to have beautiful things to look at, natural things to look at, and our lives are just enriched by having your society as part of Stouffville. Thank you. You're 100 years old. Not you, but the society.
Well, I think that's part of our problem sometimes, is that a lot of us feel like we're 100 years old and we're getting awfully close to it. So yes, the club is 100 years old, and it's an extraordinary achievement when you consider that volunteerism is really almost a dying art in many ways, understandably. But it's very difficult when you have a committee or a group of people in many, many different areas of our society that are struggling because people are working and they're two jobs and financial obligations, so that every one of our organizations is suffering from the same thing. And that is that, we're older, and the younger people that we really need to take over to provide the lifeblood and the vigor to keep the societies and groups going are just not turning up. And so we just hope that we can go on for another 100 years, but, we just need support and help. So this campaign that has come upon us, we just did not expect anything like this in our time of life, that we were going to be fighting so hard for this garden that we'll talk about, is representative in a way of this whole need for the growing community to help serve and not only beautify, but to keep the whole things vibrant and going.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. So let's start talking about that garden. What garden are we talking about? It's the Canada 150 anniversary garden, isn't it?
It is, and it's at the corner of Park and Booth, I guess you would say, right opposite where the parking lot is, across from Latcham Hall, and really where the main parking lot is for people when they want to go into Memorial Park on the other side of the road. And time's gone by, and this is before I came to Stouffville, but the city put this great roadway that went right through. And so the very eastern extreme of Memorial Park was sort of cut off, and they built up a berm. So behind it there's some houses and some woods, and there was this space. So the town was approached by the Stouffville Horticultural Society. Would they accept a garden? Could we plant one for the 150th anniversary? And they said, great. And so we proceeded, and the next thing we knew, and it happened very fast, according to one of our members, Margaret Grant, who's been one of the great supporters and instigators of the whole thing. And she said, she talked to the town about it and said, well, we'd like the garden, and what about here? And they said, fine. And then she went on holiday, and 6 weeks later there was a garden that had been created, and the stone had been put in, and everything, it was there.
Wow.
So there we go. And the town, they went to apparently huge overcost lengths to put armor stone around the front of it, and they supplied us with all kinds of soil and mulch, etc., and then left us to do all the planting, which we did with the support of a grant from the Ontario Horticultural Association, plus monies that we contributed ourselves. And so over the last 6 years, the garden has slowly been growing. Things have survived, some things haven't. And it's really reached a beautiful point of maturity now. But, and if you're not a person that is interested in that sort of thing, sometimes you might drive by it and never know it's there. But it's a significant garden, full of natural native species, things that support our wonderful pollinators that we need so much to keep going. And it would be just an absolute crime if this was to be destroyed. It would be about the fourth or fifth time that the town of Stouffville has actually decided that gardens that the Horticultural Society has planted could be destroyed and moved somewhere else. But we're putting our feet down to go to try and stop it.
Well, this seems like a very significant garden with a very significant past and a piece of history for this town.
We think so, and I think part of it is the amount of reaction that we've had. It's very heartwarming. We have started an e-petition. We've had over 1,000 signatures at last count. We have people going around to some of our seniors' residences and one of the high schools supporting a written petition. And the number of people that have written to the mayor and councillors, they won't admit how many, but believe me, there's a lot that have written. Everybody is indicating how important it is for the town to, really recognize the fact that they have places of beauty and they need to support them, and that they shouldn't be destroyed in order to put things in that perhaps don't represent the beauty or the peaceful heritage of the town.
It's interesting because I think a lot of times gardens and things like that, if you're new to a community, you drive by and you say, wow, isn't that great? If you've lived here for a long time and you drive by, it's just always there. And sometimes you notice it specifically and say, gosh, I love those pink flowers. Aren't they great? And other times you just drive by and you don't really notice it. But you always, in the back of your mind, like when someone says, oh yeah, it's that garden that's, over there by Memorial Park. Oh yeah, that one. Because subconsciously, it's always there. Human eye loves color. Human eye loves nature and natural spaces. So when we see something that's beautiful like that, it does register.
I think one of the things that's interesting is that when the garden was very young, there was quite a bit of vandalism that occurred. I mean, it was unbelievable. People stole plants and people broke trees. You couldn't believe it. They just come and they break the trees. I guess that was kids. People stealing the plants, probably not the kids. Because it was very open and the plants were little and vulnerable. And now that it's mature, there's much less of that goes on. And actually, one of the things that was stolen was the sign that said that the garden was created by the Stouffville Horticultural Society. We have no idea where that's gone, but it disappeared. But so that as it's matured and become part of the whole berm and the hill, it's settled in and become established. And so people don't look at it as a thing to sort of go and vandalize, which is great. That's what it's meant for, is to be there. And especially in the summer, when you look and that's when you see those flashes of color. In the fall and more flashes. If you drove by today, you wouldn't see anything except a bunch of sticks because it's sleeping. Mm-hmm. But come spring, up come the tulips and up come the little columbines and the wonderful little things, and little critters start moving and life goes on. And that's a garden, right?
So if they propose to move this garden somewhere else, what are the ramifications of moving some of these plants?
Well, firstly, this. I kind of put my foot down and said, "This isn't going to happen." I mean, if the town wants anything from a horticultural society, they should respect it.
That's for sure.
Our history has been rife with the town, either destroying to do something else or, not allowing us to do something or taking something away because, we're interfering with the union or little things like that are just, almost insulting, to be quite honest. And there was a garden that had been planted in Memorial Park originally where the pool was. That was destroyed to make the pool, and then everything else is gone. And there were other gardens there was a strip garden that had been installed, apparently near the old train station, closer to the sidewalk on Main Street. there was a drinking fountain in it, and that was very popular. Well, that was destroyed for something else, and the fountain kind of, went the way of all things, and all kinds of things. At one point, the Stouffville Horticultural Society was responsible for the hanging baskets in town, which were quite lovely. But after a while, the town had trouble with watering or this or that, and then they said, no, this is something that union labor should do. So we didn't do that anymore. Lots of little things like that are quite destroying. So when you say, if we move the garden, what's the point? Why would we bother to put all those hours of work and labor into moving a garden, thinking that down the road they're just going to say, oh, well, we need it for something else? It's not logical. And it's a terrible waste of money.
Now, their proposal is, according to the magazine called Year in Review 2023, for Stouffville, their proposal is that they're going to move or remove this garden and put in the cenotaph. And as part of this, they need to remove that garden because they're going to bring in a leopard tank. And the good thing is, I'm being very tongue-in-cheek with that, the good thing is, according to them, that it won't cost us anything. Oh, big whoop. Anyway, personally, in my personal opinion,
the leopard tank.
The leopard tank
won't cost us anything.
Yes,
supposedly, because the Department of Veterans Affairs, having taken all the parts useful that are possibly able to recondition other tanks that they're sending off to the Ukraine, they end up with some empty shells. And so what are they going to do with that? It's just scrap metal, right? So they make it pretty. This is my assumption, to be honest. But they make it pretty and they give it off to people. And you know what? Maybe there's a place for that. Maybe, but if you look in and around Ontario and you try to find out where there are military tanks, forget one that's as big as a school bus, they're all in or around museums, military museums, or military camps or bases. They're, with perhaps the one exception where I think there was something that was in Aurora recently done that again was tasteful and it wasn't cost them $1 million apparently, but that they were not in the middle of a town. Mm-hmm. And Stouffville, is a town that was built on peaceful ideals by many Mennonites and other communities that didn't believe in the violence and war, and they came and settled here with those ideals. And now they're proposing to put an object of war and violence in the middle of town where people go to Strawberry Festival, Rib Fest, kids play, they're going to be, making all sorts of other things that are happening in that area, and you put a thing of violence and ugliness right so where everybody can see it. Doesn't sound logical to me. And many of our new residents that have come to Stouffville come from areas where their homes and families have been either killed or destroyed by those very same leopard tanks. How would you feel if you were driving along and something like that hit you in the face when you've had to leave your home and your country? I mean, it's just appalling. Especially when you're coming here looking for peace and tranquility in a country of democracy. Well, it's bad enough so many of these people don't have a place to live, but that they have to now, possibly be faced with looking at something like that. It's not appropriate. And as for the cenotaph, I'm sure there are other areas that could be there. We were told, we had a meeting with the mayor. He was very charming. And he said that the original project for the garden that was created so rapidly ran $200,000 over budget. We were appalled when we heard that figure. We couldn't figure out where that came from, although I guess it was moving all the stone because that's expensive. Well, so you've invested $200,000 to do that. The only other thing the town's ever done is that they have provided us with mulch every year to keep the moisture in, and they help us with water. and that's it. I mean, my goodness, the volunteers used to come with buckets and pails in their cars in order to water the garden because there was no water there. Now the town does come with their water truck, and it helps with water. That's what they do. But now they're saying, oh, well, we'll just get rid of that garden, which was $200,000 down the drain. And somewhere there is a figure floating around that's saying in order to create the new space for the cenotaph and, whatever, it's going to cost $400,000.
Oh, my goodness.
So, okay, taxpayers, are we happy to do that? I don't think so. And I may be wrong with those figures, but that's what I've heard. And so it seems to me that we're talking about $600,000 of money, 200 of which is gone. Okay, we think it was well invested, I guess, because we love our garden. But the $400,000 could be perhaps better spent doing something else, like maybe giving some of these new immigrants homes or support or something like. If we've got that kind of money to spend it on something that's meaningful. At least in my eyes. I mean, we would love it if somehow we could come to an agreement with the town and the Legion and everybody that everybody saves face, everybody wins.
Right.
But the only way I can see that happening is that if the garden is saved, and if somewhere can be found, like the museum or some other place for this totally unnecessary, in my opinion, tank, and we could find a suitable place to put the cenotaph, because quite honestly, I think it's not in the best place. When you drive past where it is, it's not given the honor that it perhaps deserves. Nobody's trying to denigrate the service. My goodness, my whole family was full of soldiers, so I'm certainly not trying to sort of say, gosh, we don't appreciate the service that people gave, but perhaps just ripping out a thing of beauty that is a benefit to the community and to the pollinators and to all these other things, to put the cenotaph in isn't maybe what some of these people that sacrificed their lives would have wanted. Maybe find another place. We actually have thought of a couple of places, so when we have community consultation, which is supposedly coming up, then maybe we could bring forth those suggestions.
That would be fabulous. Now, I mean, there are so many different ways to represent the fallen soldiers, the people who fought for this country in not just World War II, but in all wars. And I don't think putting a machine of mass destruction up is necessarily it. I mean, there are beautiful bronze statues of soldiers themselves. There are the subtle statues that are inside gardens representing the beauty and nature of the things that we were fighting for. And it's just like a bronze helmet or something. You know, there are different ways of honoring those soldiers and honoring that space without having to put a stupid tank there. I mean, honestly, it's funny, when I talk to a lot of men, they're like, yeah, what's wrong with the tank? And when I talk to women, they're like, oh, that's horrible. So I think it also is a gender thing, quite honestly, but that would left to be seen.
I have to confess, we've had a certain amount of conversation about boys and their toys.
Yes.
But I think, in all honesty, this kind of snuck up on people. And what I mean is that the original proposal was, I don't know if I'm supposed to name names, but my understanding is that some years ago, one of our former prominent politicians, who's still prominent in other areas, was approached by Veterans Affairs, and they were talking as the way they do, and they said, oh, well, we have ordinance that's available from time to time, maybe you'd like some. And, oh, well, that sounds like a great idea. This was like 10 years ago. And nothing happened. And then all of a sudden comes a call saying, we have a leopard tank. Would you like it? And the first thought was, oh, my goodness, it's a leopard. Like, yeah, let's go. And I'm just wondering whether the significance just didn't quite dawn on some of the people that started to form this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the fact that we're currently engaged in 2 major wars, and heaven only knows however many minor wars all over the world that are involving these tanks, perhaps wasn't considered at the time. Times are changed.
Yes, that's for sure.
Things are different. They were different enough before October the 7th. They're more different now. All of us are aware. Our children are aware. I'm sure a lot of them are scared of what's happening in the world. And gosh, is that the smart thing to do, to put a tank where they can all... I don't think so. And I don't think it's just women that think that. There are a lot of men also who think that.
Yes, and there are a lot of refugees living in Stouffville who I'm sure do not want to see a tank every day when they're driving to and from Stouffville or around Stouffville. I just don't think it's a good thing. And that's my personal opinion, but I could name a few people, and I won't, who definitely would not want to see that every day. They left war-torn countries to come here to find a better life. And to save their families, and to have that there as a reminder, that's just awful.
Yeah. So, and it's important to not, it's really hard that you have to try and marry together a garden and a tank as the same issue.
Yes.
Because there was a really brilliant letter that was sent to the mayor by Ron Baird, who is an artist who founded Latcham Gallery, and he has some of his sculptures down on Sculptor's Walk, etc. And it was such a good letter. And basically, it was pretty short, to the point. It said, gardens, good, tanks, bad. I mean, it was that plain. And he said, you know, you know the right choice. Do the right thing. And so, because we can't just say we want to save the garden and throw the tank, because it's together. Mm-hmm. So it's a really difficult conundrum to try and fight. I mean, the town, for instance, said, "Oh no, we'll provide you with another garden." But quite honestly, what would be the point? Mm-hmm. I mean, that means that they're perfectly happy to throw away the $200,000 that was invested and the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer work that's gone into maintaining the garden, plus the fact that the garden is a place of beauty. I mean, people say, "Oh, we walk by it, we love it, we walk our babies by it in their strollers, da-da-da-da-da-da." I mean, truthfully, if they'd like to put some money in, let's find a place to put some benches so we can sit down and enjoy it. But anyway, so, you know, this is that's the one thing we try to save, but we can't, on the other hand, forget that if we save that, what are they going to do with the tank and the cenotaph? Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me like there's 3 separate issues almost. There's the location of the cenotaph, there's the garden itself, and there's the tank as a representation of our soldiers who fought for this country. So we're going to take a little break at the station here, and when we come back, we'll just talk about the garden itself, because I'm looking at the rendering that they've got in this magazine, the review, and I see all kinds of potential for that garden to stay right where it is. And we're going to be right back on Fresh Waves in just a second, so stay tuned. Hi, we're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning we're speaking with Joan Bostock about the Horticultural Society of Stouffville, about the gardens that were the memorial gardens for the Canada 150, or the celebration of Canada 150 gardens that are located across the street from Memorial Park. And we're talking also about the relocation of the cenotaph and the tank that's proposed and all of this. And Joan, thank you so much for joining us on Fresh Waves. We're really happy to have you on the show this morning.
Well, thank you. This is all new to me. As I said, I'm nearly as old as the club itself, and I had no thoughts that I would become involved in a campaign. I had never been to a council meeting in my life, much to my shame. And it's all been an education. Wasn't expecting it, but it's been an eye opener for sure.
Well, we really think that this is a worthwhile talking point. I mean, Stouffville is growing. The Ontario government has mandated that different communities around Ontario increase their population, increase affordable housing. Stouffville is one of those communities, and our population is going to really, really grow in the near future. We have more and more people moving in. Planning is a really integral part of that. And planning with a purpose is also a big part of that. The Horticultural Society of Stouffville has been a really solid, in my opinion, club or organization for 100 years. It has changed, but people sometimes take for granted the fact that these gardens are so beautiful. And when you have a new sprawling community with condos going up, apartments, and what they call them high-rise in the construction industry, and a lot of low-rise with townhouses and stacked townhouses, we're using a lot of land for housing, and we still have to maintain some sort of beauty in the community. And that corner across from Memorial Park is a beautiful spot. And I would hate to see that place of beauty go by the wayside.
Well, I think we can hang up now because you've said everything. It's true, all of the above. And I think the significance of what is there, now it's not an entirely native garden. There are things in there that aren't native, but that much as I'm a huge proponent of native plants and gardens, I think a mixture is just fine. And, it supports a whole community of creatures that benefit things. Ideally, what would happen is that there'd be little, gardens that are all pollinator gardens all over the town. Now, supposedly in 2023, Stouffville was named a bee city, and the purpose of being a bee city is that it supports the pollinator things that allow the bees and other pollinators to survive and thrive. It's a bit of an oxymoron.
It seems to me.
Like which hat, who was wearing what hat? So there's just, there's obviously a disconnect somewhere. Apparently the reason that the garden was chosen as the place for the cenotaph was the people on staff that originally recommended 2 locations, and the Legion said they liked 1 location, and staff said no, they preferred our location. And the story was that, well, all of these people were new because we have so many new employees on staff because they couldn't keep any employees for the longest time, and we don't know why that is, but there was a huge turnover, and so everybody was new in their jobs, and they didn't know the history of the garden, et cetera, and so on. This was what the mayor told us. Well, actually, the mayor was a councillor at the time that the garden was created. He knew all about it. So, he supported this new plan, so obviously the garden wasn't important to him. But it's just a lack of ignorance. And in that garden, you've got trees that are native. As a matter of fact, we just planted this fall a nice new witch hazel tree that was planted as a memorial to Walter, I think it's Walter Kuttel, who was a landscaper, a local landscaper who just died a couple of years ago. And Walter was a huge supporter of the Stouffville Hort Society. He helped us work on the gardens that we created at Parkview home, and he helped with the raised beds that we did so the residents can manage to garden there. So when Walter died, we thought it would be awfully nice to do something as a memorial to him. So just this fall, we planted at the very top of the hill, at the very, very edge of our garden, a wonderful witch hazel tree, which is native, which will bloom early in the spring, which supports lots of pollinators. And now, 2 months later, we hear, oh, guess what? We're going to destroy the garden. Whoa, come on, guys. So,
isn't it true that a lot of those plants would not survive a transplant situation of being moved somewhere else?
Well, I think the ones that are mature, absolutely. I mean, you'd have to have, really professional gardeners with professional tools, et cetera, and so on, because they're bigger now. And so, absolutely. I mean, you certainly can divide plants, quite easily, but not when they get to be big. And the thing about that site is, it's actually interesting. The reason that there's a berm there is that the site was quite wet. So originally they had filled it in and they'd made this berm originally because it was wet. So with all of the soil there, it dries out quickly, but also the roots go down deeply because there's so much soil. Mm-hmm. So it will be difficult. It would be very difficult to move them. I mean, really, when they talk about destroying the garden, yes, they might be able to save a few things, but the majority of it would be compost. That's all. It would be sad.
It would be very sad. And when I look at this rendering in the brochure here, the year in review, for anyone who's from Stouffville and listening and wants to see it, it's on page 11 of the Stouffville.
Yeah, you can access it online also.
Yeah, year in review. There's this rendering at the bottom of what the cenotaph with the tank and everything would look like. And I look at that and think, well, I can also see the garden there, and then putting some more benches. If you wanted to put a stone head representing Canada 150, I would rather see. But anyway, something of significance in the garden. I could see turning that whole corner place into a spot where people would come and sit, where birds would come to, and maybe have some of the handmade birdhouses that I know people in this community make, and everything would be approved by the Horticultural Society, and we would honor the 100-year celebration of the Horticultural Society of Stouffville, and that would be their memorial and their place. What is wrong with that? It's already there. It just needs a couple of benches and a plaque.
I guess I would say the problem is the actual physical limitations of that corner. Is the armor stone that retains the soil that the garden is built up from comes fairly close to where the sidewalk is. And if you're going to have a bench to sit and enjoy it, you want to be able to turn it around and enjoy it, as opposed to just sitting it on the edge, because there's not much point sitting with your back to the garden.
Right.
So there's not a huge amount of space there to create that sort of a thing, plus the fact that it's on a corner and cars are coming around, and you want to make sure that everybody's safe. So that it might be logistically difficult. And plus the fact that the cenotaph, at the size that it is, would take up the whole garden. I mean, it's huge. So it would, to me, I mean, the garden just has to stay the way the garden is. But if you were to move a little further south along the edge of that berm, and there's a space where they could landscape possibly an area to put the cenotaph and a flag, etc., and so on, it might fit there. But the Legion, to our understanding, is they want it to be able to have Memorial Day services around it. And so what they have been doing at their site on Mostar is they have their memorial site all huddled on the sidewalk, which is not desirable, and I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. But then they go down to into their building, and they have a coffee or hot chocolate or whatever. It's a money raiser. They have things they do. I don't know what they do, but I'm understanding that they raise money, which is helping with their funding and fundraising, like all clubs have to do. So if the cenotaph and the hopefully not tank is put somewhere else that's off-site, where there's nowhere where they can go and take advantage of the possibility of getting warm and doing what they do to raise their funds, it makes it awkward. Now, if you go down on Main Street, where the clock tower is, mm-hmm. on Remembrance Day, people come and they put their poppies on the clock tower.
Nice.
Why do they do that?
Because it's the center of town?
Thank you. Why do they do that? They do that because it's a central place, and it just seems to be appropriate for them. Then behind that, we've got the theater, which has space inside that could be used. It's a nice warm space. Of course, Fickle Pickles across the street, they'd love it. So on the other side, there's the Stouffville, the flower store. You know, where they are saying they're going to demolish that, the flower shop, and create something. Why don't they put the cenotaph there?
That would be lovely. Without the tank. Just in my opinion again.
Like I said, nix the tank. So, but the cenotaph, it would be, they could create their park, their little garden. They could make it a beautiful space. It would be part of the town, a respectful place where people could gather, where they could go in afterwards into the warm building and have their coffee, hot chocolate, whatever. And it would be, I think, a brilliant compromise. Mm-hmm. Because they say they're going to destroy that building anyway. I mean, that's been in their plans. It's not happened yet, but there you go. So that's just one of our thoughts.
Yeah, and I think that's very responsible of the society, of the Horticultural Society too, and the people who are now on board with this fight to save that garden. You know, it's like the old thing where one of my teachers used to say, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. So you state the problem and make sure that you have a couple of solutions in your back pocket. And I think you guys have really done a good job of thinking this through and seeing the different aspects and knowing that no one is saying that we don't want a cenotaph. No one's saying that.
No.
And no one is saying that we don't want gardens. Well, the town is, but we're not. So we want the garden. We want the cenotaph. How do we make this work? And perhaps this shouldn't have been pushed through without public consultation.
My understanding is that on the 6th of December, when this decision was made and council voted 6 in favor of it, the 7th being unfortunately absent, it had been thought that it was going to be deferred for further consultation, but it wasn't. It just went through, and that's where it's almost like we're between a rock and a hard place, because having made the decision, council does not have to change that decision. I don't think that the town wants to go against the whole founding principles of what Stouffville was founded on. I mean, when I look at the meeting notes, when April 11th, 1924 is when the Stouffville Horticultural Society had its first meeting. And I have the minute book there. My goodness, they were talk about saving your environment. The minute book, they even wrote on the inside cover of the minute book, because everything was valued and saved for the, you don't waste a thing. And every little inch of this book is covered in beautiful handwritten script of what they did and where they met and how many members they had. By 1926, they had 224 members of the Stouffville Horticultural Society, and many of them were men. The first executive were mostly men, and they did extraordinary things, and they were able to do so not only because they had a lot of people, but they were a basically farming and environmentally conscious community, and they believed in what they were doing.
Yeah. That's amazing that you have that book. It should be at the museum.
And I open it and I look at the number of the names. I mean, I'm sitting here with one right in my hands right now. And who were the members? And they were the Stoufers and the Burkholders and the all these people the Acton. As I was saying, that Betty Acton, bless her soul, 99 years old. She died 2 weeks ago, and she was a member for years of the Stouffville Horticultural Society. And so now her son Keith is on council, And so maybe we need to allow him to remember that his mother spent years being a member of the Stouffville Horticultural Society.
And I think we need to honor the Stouffville Horticultural Society for what it is. There are very few organizations that can say that they're 100 years old.
I mean, in our supposedly young country, this is true. And so I know we were trying back in 2017, what would we do for the sesquicentennial? So we said, well, let's make a garden. And it was bigger than we'd originally intended. Like, we hadn't thought it would be that big, but it was. And those loyal people that have been working at it all those 6 years they've been going, and it's now created a really lovely, mature space. Now, it's not something that's ever going to be on the magazine of fine gardening or anything like that, but it's a lovely space with a community of plants that support each other and us. And
what a beautiful thing to say. That's a lovely statement. That should be on the gardens itself.
Well, we cannot survive without our pollinators.
No, we can't.
Our earth will not survive. And one of the reasons that we have gone sort of outside the bounds of Stouffville to try and tell this story is that gardens and the environment is a global issue.
Absolutely.
This is something that all of us need to worry about. Our children are going to be responsible for taking care of the mess that we made. If a plant that grows naturally in this area historically over thousands of years will support the pollinators that have learned to eat from it. Mm-hmm. But if you bring in something that comes from another area in the world that plants it because it's pretty, our little bugs and insects that are so necessary for the survival of the birds and everything else, they don't know what to do with that plant. They're not genetically able to thrive on that. Mm-hmm. So if we keep planting, I mean, if you look around the hedgerows and you look at all these Phragmites that are everywhere, this is a foreign thing that's come in and has taken over all our ditches and all our things, taking away all the natural little things that might be growing there. It's horrible. Talk about invasive. And so we need to grow more things that support our genetically, historically, plants that have grown here and thrived here. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do with our gardens, and not just the Stouffville Horticultural Society Canada 150 garden. That means all of us need to plant a couple of things if we have a garden space or on our balconies of something that our native species can feed on.
And I can see using that garden, because of its location, not only as just to beautify that space, but as a representation of what you were just saying, of the Horticultural Society itself, of the greening of our communities, and our appreciation for native species that are threatened by invasive species. And using it as an educational tool, as a beautification. There's just so many applications that spot can showcase for the town of Stouffville, which prides itself on being the city in the country close to the city. You know, it's just...
Yeah, the city, a bee city.
Yes.
The town has made those little boulevards down the middle of Main Street, and there are some native things in there. That's great. It's fantastic. Good for them. But... there's a long way to go.
Absolutely.
And there is no there's no vision in the city, in the town. For instance, I have a tree on my front yard, which was planted years ago when the house was first built, and it's first of all not well planted. Its roots go all over my front, which ruins half of the things that I try to grow there. And I approached the city a long time ago, and I said, could I pay to remove this tree, please? It's a boulevard tree. Could I please pay to remove that tree and pay myself to plant a nice new native tree that I can plant there? No. I couldn't do that. Shows a lack of vision.
Yeah, a lack of foresight and
like,
looking into the future of this town.
If let's just say I'd planted an oak tree there, which would have been lovely.
Mm-hmm.
An oak tree supports over 400 species of native insects that have learned over millennia to feed on those trees. So if it feeds over 400 species and it grows this and they make little caterpillars and everything else. Well, what happens to the caterpillars? Well, people don't want creepy crawlies all over their properties. I understand that. But they love chickadees.
Mm-hmm.
And chickadees need like over 200 caterpillars a day to feed their young. Like, where do they get them? Well, if they don't have the native trees around to grow the grow the insects to grow the caterpillars, they don't have them, and we don't have chickadees.
It's all about education, isn't it? If people understood the really, really important things in this world, the really important things that sustain us and keep us alive, bees are one of them. Without bees, we as a human race die. It's that simple.
Yes, and you have to remember there's been a big thing about bees. And of course, with the fact is that we've created monocultures and orchards, and so people have to bring in bees. There's people with bee businesses, and they bring in their hives, and their bees swarm to pollinate the trees and the plants. But those honeybees are not native; they do not naturally grow in our areas. We have many, many native bees that can do just as good a job, but not at the mass quantity that is needed because of all our monocultures. But we have hundreds of species of native bees. And flies pollinate, hummingbirds pollinate, lots of things pollinate. So it isn't just the bees we need to concentrate on. It's just our native flora and fauna in our area. Mm-hmm. To support what's here.
To support our ecosystems.
If you live in Florida, then support what's there. And if you live in Sudbury, there's more things that you can support there, because every area has its own area of specialty. And so we just have to learn what's growing here and grow it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're running out of time on Fresh Waves, and it happens all the time here. And I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning, for bringing these issues to light. And I hope that people, if you haven't seen it before, this spring, do drive by the gorgeous Canada 150 Gardens across from Memorial Park and take a look. Go drive down Park Drive, you get to the intersection and you'll see it there. It's a beautiful garden. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to look at as you drive by. Don't drive by looking at it. Stop in the parking lot, walk across the street and take a look. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I would hate to see it go by the wayside, and I'm glad that you were able to come and bring some light to the situation.
Well, and if I could just add briefly, if people are interested, if they can go to our website, which is the Stouffville, just Google Stouffville Horticultural Society, and they'll get there, and they can, maybe partake in our e-petition or whatever. All the support that anybody can give is greatly appreciated.
That would be wonderful. And there are petitions that can be signed, and they're at different places all over Stouffville currently.
Yeah, that's right.
Parkview has Mert Hoover in there.
I think every single resident at Parkview is signed that is physically able to. She's done an amazing job.
Yes, and it's a weekend, so people are coming through and they're going to visit their loved ones who are over at Parkview. While you're there, please take the time to sign the petition.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the high school too has they've been signing, and we're on the march.
On the march. Good for you. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been Fresh Waves, and thanks for listening. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning we're talking with Joan Bostock. If you'd like to hear this show again, you can go to our YouTube channel, Fresh Waves Radio. You can hit subscribe, and that supports all of the shows that we do here on Fresh Waves. And if you would like to share the link, then go ahead and share this around so that people become aware of what's going on with the beautiful 150 Gardens across from Memorial Park. And you'll learn a little bit about the Stouffville Horticultural Society along the way, and that's not such a bad thing either. We hope everybody has a fabulous day, and we'll catch you again next time on Fresh Waves.